Hello and welcome to week 15, our last week of instruction in Anthropology 390, Mediterranean Archaeology. The theme for this week is material culture. As I say on our Canvas page, I've written you some notes. I say that the theme for this week, our last one, has been carefully chosen for several reasons. It sort of brings us full circle, but as I've written here, it says this theme is directly related to last week's theme of a place for art. Very related to that theme. In fact, you can even consider it an extension of last week in some ways. It's also rooted in older traditions of classical archaeology, those sort of traditions that were especially emphasized in the first week of instruction of this course. Again, taking a sort of full circle. It also allows an outlet for the visual learner, because this week is very, very visually oriented. I'm going to be providing examples of many of the artifacts or artwork discussed throughout the semester. So, yes, I've given you pictures and other presentations, and I've shown you a sample of this and a sample of that. And in truth, even after viewing this enormous presentation today, yes, I'm confessing the beginning, it's enormous, we are not going to see all the possible examples of material culture that there are, but I'm hoping to really inundate you and saturate your minds with the sorts of material culture that was created in the ancient Mediterranean. So I said that this is an enormous presentation. I've admitted that as well on Canvas, but I've allowed for that. My goal is to do a lot of the work for you this week. You're tired. Because of that, I have only assigned you a very small reading. The reading is 6 pages long. That's it. But I worked hard to try and find just the right reading, something that would focus on art and material culture, yet give you a review in a way of the entire semester. This 6-page work by Joan Mertens doesn't do a bad job of that, to be perfectly honest. So I do recommend, if possible, that you read it first. Do the 6 pages of reading, and then dive into this if possible, if you can do it in that order. If not, it's all good. I've also included a set of questions for this week, like I have every other week in the semester. But like last week, those questions are focusing both on the readings and the visual presentation. So it's split about half and half this week, about half visual presentation and half the reading. So make sure you have printed them off or have them up on your computing device somehow and are looking. I would suggest looking at those questions first before you start in on the presentation, and then you'll perhaps encounter the answers to those questions as we go. And I think that's about all. Oh, other than the fact that in that 6-page reading by Mertens, she certainly after about the second page of reading starts to refer to plate numbers. Those are images that would have been available to you had you had the entire book. So I have taken the liberty of scanning those particular plates that she refers to. If you want to look at the example that she's actually pointing out as you go, you can just look. So you'll find a link on Canvas right below your reading assignment. It'll say, for the images referred to in this reading, click here. And if you click there, then you'll get a page of those specific images with plate numbers underneath them, so that and they're in order of plate number. So you should be able to reference those images quite readily as you're going through that reading. And I think that pretty much covers it. The only other thing I would say, and I have a lot to say today, and I'm going to do my very best to try and keep this to 3 hours. We shall see. We'll see what happens in the end. Is that for your final exam, and I'll send out an announcement as well. I just wanted to let you know that it's going to be a take-home exam. I hope to have that exam for you this week. It's going to be a series of essays and perhaps paragraph answers, and you'll be turning that in by the end of finals week. So I'll have all those instructions written out for you, probably by the time you're watching this presentation. So ready, set, go. Here we are, presentation. Now, if you notice this very first page, it says Material Culture of the Ancient Mediterranean, Part 2. That's right. Since last week, I consider Part 1. We started looking at that when we were doing a place for the readings on a place for art. We started looking at a couple of media. So Part 2. Part 1 was metalworking and wall painting. Part 2, we're going to look at two huge groups, that of sculpture and ceramics, and then we'll do a small bit at the end of various other kinds of work with different media and materials, just to give you a taste of some of the things. We'll be doing the same structure as last week. We'll be addressing the material from the various cultures in the order that's specified here, Minoan through Roman. And as I said last week, these cultures won't always receive equal representation, partly because of the availability of the pieces and partly because of the popularity of that particular medium within those cultures. So, there's one more thing I want to preface, and that is that with every single piece that I'm showing you here, I could probably spend, I don't know, at least 15 minutes on them, some of them more. I could go on and on and on and on about some of these pieces and all the bits of information that they offer us from both a archaeological perspective and an art historical perspective. But my goal is to introduce you to these things. Sometimes I'm going to really put on that art historian hat and we're going to look at things from that perspective. Other times I'm going to flip through them quite quickly and just show you, okay, so here are more examples of the same thing. And I just can never take off that archaeological hat. So I can't not bring up archaeological stuff. So here we go. All right, medium, sculpture. And the most of the examples that I have to show you in here are Greek and Roman, but I have quite a lot of Etruscan stuff too. So let's go. Here we go. Where does sculpture start? Well, in your readings by Merton, she starts in the Bronze Age, some early Bronze Age in the Cycladic Islands, and you've certainly been introduced to those things in especially chapters in the first half of this semester. So many people see the art, especially the sculpture of the peoples who lived in the Cycladic Islands here, as the predecessors for what would be, later art, certainly of Greeks and Romans. So here is an example of one of the famous sculptures, a standing female figure. They didn't always do female figures, but they're predominantly female, and they're not always in this position, but most of them are. This sort of folded arm figure position. Notice that they had a certain, let us say, recipe in terms of size. You can see that illustrated here by these three circles. This particular figure, like I said, is female like most of them, and her arms are folded like most of them, which is one of the reasons they get the name of folded arm figurines, or FAFs. And here are some more examples of them. You can see, again, that most of them are female, and in this FAF, folded arm figurine position. Minoan culture is really the earliest culture that I'm going to cover in every other section that we discuss here. some examples of Minoan sculpture are here on this page. The Minoans were not huge on creating sculpture, but we're finding new stuff all the time. This middle one is a famous figurine, female figurine. We think it's a goddess figurine. She's done in ivory. The one on the right here is a relatively new find, to be perfectly honest, and it's really exciting to us because we have this three-dimensional sculpture that really matches the way the human body is depicted in wall paintings and other art forms for the Minoan sphere. So this is a really cool piece, also made of ivory, hippopotamus ivory. Actually, 8 separate pieces put together. Also serpentine and rock crystal and gold were used. And the one on the left is probably also, maybe a goddess figure or a worshipping figure of a female. Moving on, Mycenaean sculpture. We have very little from the Mycenaean world. I'll show you some figurines, and these are examples of a couple of things that we've actually saw in our Bronze Age section. The one on the right here are the gates leading to the Mycenaean citadel at Mycenae. These would have been two heraldic figures of lions. And here are some small, probably votive offerings. We know what votives are now, and you can see the interest in geometry in all these figurines. Keep trying to keep it short. And moving on to Greece, where I'm going to spend a bit more time because we have a lot more examples in part, and we have a lot more changes over time in Greek. So the Greeks have two kinds of sculpture that we'll focus on. One are freestanding pieces or sculpture in the round. Often the materials, those are made with bronze or marble. We're also going to look at relief sculpture. You can see that you couldn't look around the back of this because we only see the front of it. It's something that's carved into a flat piece of stone usually. Can be terracotta as well. So these are usually associated with architecture, treasury buildings or temple buildings frequently. So here's an example of relief sculpture in low relief, i.e. it's not very deep. And to the right, we see one in high relief. Do you see it's very deep? It's almost in the round, but not quite. In the Archaic period, 8th to 6th century BC, one of the earliest periods we really discuss sculpture in the Greek world, one of the most, perhaps what many art historians consider one of the most profound achievements with respect to art in the Greeks is this, are the developments in standing sculpture. In particular, the standing male nude, which we refer to as a kouros or kouroi in the plural, and the standing female, which is always clothed, the kore or korai. I've talked about these in the past, so I won't go in great detail. These are usually life-size or sometimes much, much greater than life-size, to be perfectly honest. Freestanding sculpture was used, like the kouroi in the previous slide, used for, we think, in temple context, but also frequently in funerary contexts. We also have sculpture in the round that's used in temple contexts as part of the decoration of the actual building. And what I have to show you here are examples of sculpture in the round or freestanding sculpture that's used in the pedimental area, the triangular part at the front, at the top of the roof. And the reason I show you these particular examples, because it's at this one temple, the Temple of Aphaia at Aegina, it gives us sort of an extraordinary venue for seeing a transition of this style from a more archaic way of approaching this to something that is a little bit more like the classical Greek artists would have approached it. So let me show you a bit more about what I mean. So comparing these two reclining figures here, the roof, as you can imagine, the triangular portion of the roof, there's a front and a back, right, of that triangle, the pediment. And this particular figure at the top is from the west pediment, and the figure at the bottom is from the east pediment. And it's interesting to note that in many ways they're lying in a similar position. And that makes them also really super for comparison as well. Because here we see something that looks very like a kouros with the hair and this sort of like this stiff body, very sort of posed, this kind of like benign smile, sort of almost inhuman face. But here we have someone that is looking more natural, and is looking more like a human being rather than a statue. Something more realistic rather than stylized. We have the same thing going on, I would suggest, here with these two archer type individuals. Again, one from the west pediment from the more archaic period we have in the upper one, and one from the east pediment, the one that seems to be bridging towards classical sculpture. Again, something that's leading more and more into something that's more naturalistic. So in the classical period, this freestanding sculpture is a focus of development, and we're going to be looking at some of that development. I'm obviously not going to show you every piece through the transition and development of this particular type of sculpture, but I will show you some examples and hope to support my assertion that there is a change throughout this period. It's a focus of Greek artists, and the interest becomes increasingly naturalistic while idealistic as well. So one example of this transition is probably seen here by comparison the archetypical kouros on the left-hand part of the screen, very archaic looking, to this particular piece on the right, which is named the Critias boy. He is considered by many as I say, the archetypical transitional kouros. He is in many ways like those pedimental figures I showed you from the temple of Apphia. Of something of an example of something that sort of crosses the bridge between this archaic model on the left and to something that's going to be much more naturalistic after the Critias boy. He's far more relaxed. If you see here, he is you can see the softly rounded body forms, not nearly as stiff as our kouros. He has much broad facial features, very different, a calm expression. His no longer we see the kind of tension in the body that we did in the kouroi. The kouroi always had their fists very clenched. They were always very, very stiff. So we're starting to see everything is starting to become more rounded and relaxed. The changes continue throughout the classical period, and we start to see these kinds of freestanding males represented with this sort of self-confident seriousness. We see a shift of the weight from being very central in the body to one it starts to rest on here on his left leg, and with a more relaxed right leg, bending slightly at the knee. if we look, we can see this curve of the spine, which accentuates this balance on the one leg, and his hips start to shift. You see this shifts. The left buttocks is lifting sort of up, and the right one is far more relaxed. So artists are, and the drop of the shoulder, right? See the drop of the shoulder, the left shoulder, and the right one's a bit raised. So artists are studying the male form and trying to mimic it in art. All this shifting of weight and balance are working toward what would be what we call, in the art realm, the contrapposto pose. And this guy here on our left, this is the spear carrier. He's probably the archetypical example of this contrapposto pose, and you can see it just starting to happen with our boy on the right here, and it becomes its most exaggerated version when we see it in the spear bearer, which we'll look at again later. So here you can see it even more accentuated, right, than the Critias boy. These are what many people call the Riace warriors, or the Riace bronzes. These were found in a shipwreck, actually, off the coast of Italy, I believe in the Adriatic Sea. So with these guys, these bronzes, we see this idealized smoothness of and a perfected anatomy, a real reproduction of what, an attempt at reproduction of what, the artist sees in the natural world. We definitely have a far more emphasized contrapposto stance here, more emphasized and pronounced counterbalance, right? You see looking at the shoulders, right? So this shoulder raised, this hip raised, you can see it in opposites, right? So in this particular warrior, we have left shoulder, right hip, right? And in this one, it's not quite as, the shoulder's not quite as raised as his buddy, but again, you have a left shoulder, right hip, which is counterposed with the lowered hip of the left hip and right shoulder. There is evidence for the attempted balance between idealized perfection and natural details of the human body. We see that with respect to the inserted eyeballs of bone and colored glass, which you can see in this up-close version of this particular warrior. We see it in the silver plating, that's right, of his teeth here. There was even copper inlays, which I can't don't have a great picture of the nipples, but you can certainly see the copper inlay of the mouth here, attempting to show the color. There were eyelashes attached, right? And the eyebrows are actually meant to extend. They're sort of from separately cast strands of bronze. So trying to make them look very, very realistic. So here we are back to that spear bearer, which I saw was the basically the height of the contrapposto freestanding male. So here, this is the classical ideal. It observes nature and pares down the irregularities, making them more ideal, more perfect. Uses geometry to present notions of perfect proportions in their models. In fact, we think there was an actual sort of recipe or a canon that was considered the canon of perfection, and it was one utilized by the artist Polykleides. It's said to be a system of ratios between the basic unit and the length of the body parts, but the truth is we're not exactly sure what that recipe is. So here we are. Yes, Polykleides is spear bearer. I think that he's also mentioned in your reading, so don't recall if they give you pictures of the door for us there or not. once we get to the 4th century, sort of beyond the classical period, right, we see a continued search for the ideal human form. We're starting to know more about who the artists are. Praxiteles and Lysippos are two artists that we know of, and we are told that they created a new canon or recipe of proportions. Certainly, this particular individual, Hermes, seems to have a different sort of goal with respect to his proportions than we did the Dorophorus in the previous slide. The ideal is taller. He's eight heads tall instead of 6.5 or 7, which Praxiteles Dorophorus was. And the head is smaller compared to the body, and the body is a little more sinuous, flexible. So what's interesting too is that contrapost of pose is not really there. Yes, sure, we have a shifting of weight, but this time our weight is off balance a bit, which creates this sort of S curve of a pose. You see. Then here is an example of Lysippos, which is one of those that's created this new canon. Here you can again see that pronounced S curve. Ready? Here we also have in the 4th century an example, just like we did really in the previous slide, of sort of a narrative, i.e. this person is doing something, not just standing there. If you think back to Archaeology, who was just standing there, right? Now we have people doing things. In the previous slide, right? So we had Hermes and the infant Dionysus engaging in some way here. And then, we have this guy who is... he's given himself a bath, basically, scraping himself with a strigil. Remember what strigils are? I posted one a couple of weeks ago on your Canvas page. Then by the later 4th century, we enter the Hellenistic period. And the Hellenistic period is, some people don't like it so much. I think it's fantastic myself. It's really interesting, but it's highly influenced on basic things that art and images and influence that's coming from a much bigger world. This is the post-Alexander era, in which contact is made and far more reaching places, both east and west. This is one of my favorite pieces here, I have to confess. The Dying Gallic Trumpeter. Back when I first learned about this piece, we just called him the Dying Gaul. We know he's a Gaul for several reasons, so I think I get to that in the next slide, so I won't spend too much time on it now. But here we are. This is a Roman copy after an original bronze. And that's often what we get, as you've learned in your various readings, is that many of the Greek bronzes were melted down, quite honestly, over time. But the Romans were so enamored with Greek sculpture that they often made exact copies, or sometimes several copies with you can notice slight differences between them, or they would have copied just the head and torso, and perhaps made it the basis for some hero-like scene, included, which was meant to be the emperor or something. So we get these copies. This is supposed to be an exact copy of an original bronze that dated about in the 3rd century BC, and they often made the copies in marble. The Romans did. So here, during the Hellenistic phase, we see expressionism, i.e. a deliberate attempt to elicit a specific emotional response in the viewer. And here you're supposed to empathize with this individual. If you haven't already figured it out, here he is. Here's his trumpet lying next to him, and he's dying. We know he's a Gaul for a couple of reasons, partly because of this torque. Do you see the necklace, his torque around his neck? It's interesting to see that here's a torque that was found in France, in ancient Gaul. And it's very like the one that this particular trumpeter is wearing. Another hint to the fact that he's a Gaul, aside from this torque, which a Roman or a Greek would have never worn. It was very much part of a Gallic, repertoire of adornment. We know it by his hair, right? This wild, massive hair, his and this mustache. You don't until much later do you really. Hadrian is the first one I can think of that's depicted with facial hair. It's not really a very popular thing, certainly at the time that this particular statue has been produced. So, and again, one of my favorites. But looking back at idealism and form and weight of the human body. You can't help but admire the artist's attention to detail of the musculature on this particular piece. I could go on about this one. I love this piece, but I'm going to go on. So what about women, right? We've been looking at men. We haven't looked at a woman since I said that the female version, right, of a kore or korai was always clothed, etc. And so here's an example. On the left, I just pointed with my finger, and I'm like expecting you to see I pointed with my finger, pointing with my pointer now. So here, last time we talked about women, we saw, right, that they were clothed, and again, this might have been placed in a temple context, but also more likely in the funerary context. So, from the Archaic period, we enter the classical period, and we notice that women are, especially looking over here, they are still clothed, right? But the drapery becomes really heavy, right? So she's, we can't really see much. We don't have too much of a clue as to the shape of her body. We know it might be possible that she has hips, and we see a slight lump for a breast there, so there's an indication that there's something under there. But it's interesting, in the classical period, we get a lot more clothing, right? Drapes and drapes and drapes of stuff, but we also get a little bit more of a glimpse as to the form underneath that clothing. We also go from this tense stance to see how she's just grasping her dress on the right here with her, and the weight resting on both legs, much like the Critias boy. We see also an evolution in terms of stance, a relaxed knee and an attempt to show weight and balance rather differently. 5th century development continued, so we got all these heavy drapery too. One of my favorite pieces here is from this is just one of several reliefs, to be perfectly honest, from the parapet on the Temple of Nike on the Acropolis of Athens. But look, she's comparing her to the caryatids here, which these are the caryatids from a temple called the Erechtheion, right? They're similar in that the drapery, right? They both got lots and lots of heavy drapery. But you also, again, get to see a hint of the shape of the woman underneath. Here we have one of the Nikes. In fact, there was lots of different pictures of different Nikes. Well, I say here, as I tell you here, the low wall was faced with various relief panels of winged attendants, i.e. Nike. So here's one that stops, though. She stopped mid-action. So again, we kind of see this narrative coming out, don't we? Mid-action. To do what? But to adjust her sandal. A normal, everyday thing that you might need to do as you're walking along attending, your goddess, Athena. But, we see the shape of her legs because she's done this, right? So we have a knee and a thigh here. We have a much more distinct glimpse of what might be the potential shape of her breasts, and even a nipple here. We can almost see the fold, right? A fold here in her torso as she stands over. So, and we have of course, her garment draping off the side. So all these little glimpses into what might be underneath all this yards and yards of drapery. It's so funny that it's so heavy that it lays on her like it's wet, right? So that you can see you can see the shape of her arm here, even though she's got all this heavy drapery on. So it's very it's sort of wet. It's like the ancient wet t-shirt sort of scenario. Okay, I'm going forward. So here we are in the 4th century. Whoa, what happened? We've lost our drapery, right? So here we are. Women finally get to take their clothes off. Yay! I think. Am I supposed to say yay? I don't know. I'll ponder that for a while. So here we have, but the thing is we haven't done it intentionally. No, you've sort of caught her. You've caught her undressed. She was perhaps bathing or something. She's wearing her robe here, and she knows she's been caught, so she's put her hand up to cover her genitalia, right? But that only serves to draw your attention to where she is, right? So is she feigning modesty, or is the artist modest on her behalf? On the other hand, desiring for you to focus on what she's more or less pointing to, her genitalia. In the Hellenistic period, remember the male version, the male Hellenistic example I showed you was that dying Gaul, right? So here's an interesting character. And that's one of the things that's interesting about the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period is full of drama. And I'll show you another example of drama, but it's individuals, right? That dying Gaul was very much a trumpeter. That person, he wasn't just some random trumpeter. No, he was a trumpeter that probably, he had a name, didn't he? It seemed more like a portrait at a moment in the narrative. And here we have a female example of a portrait of an individual in a moment on her way, we think, to the market, perhaps, by which she's carrying. These images are meant to evoke emotion, just like the dying Gaul was. You were supposed to feel that. Here you are too. Potentially, are you feeling sorry for her? Are you feeling disgusted by the fact that she's perhaps grotesque? Are you feeling enticed by her because one of her breasts is virtually exposed? So it's interesting. It's supposed to evoke these things. Here we are. Some more details of this particular individual. As I say, she's disarrayed, elegantly so, really, in the way that her dress is falling off. Her stare is unfocused. We think that maybe she's a courtesan, because the ivy wreath on her head marks her as also a devotee to Dionysus. And she may be on her way to making an offering to that god. So it's interesting. It's as to what it's supposed the kinds of different emotions that it may be evoking. And I think this is the last female I expect to show you, right? So remember the wet clothes, right, that we had from the Nike adjusting her sandal. and thinking also of the clothing draping off our market woman that may be a devotee of Dionysus. Here, this particular Nike is also draped, but there's not much left to the imagination in terms, you can even see, her belly button, right? Not just the fact that, not just the shape of her breasts or the shape of her thighs. You actually see the bones in her knee, right? Not just the shape. So you're really not missing much in the way of detail. It's also exciting and dramatic, right? She's not just standing there. She's not just leaning on one leg, right? Just like a even a chorus of the classical period. Oh no, she's about to potentially even take off, or maybe she's just landed, right? It's mid-action, right? Her shoulders are back, and the wind is blowing. It's very theatrical and it's really big. This would have been in a sanctuary on the top of a cliff, right? So it's something that's also in a very dramatic setting, in addition to being dramatic herself. I'll leave that alone. Oh, yep, I do. That's right. How can I end a conversation on women in sculpture, and I'm talking too much? I'm going to have to speed up my voice here, or stop admiring these things so much. But I can't discuss this topic without bringing the famous Venus de Milo into things, can I? So there we are. I'm ending in the 2nd century with this Aphrodite of Milos, or Venus de Milo, and looking at her and comparing her to this Aphrodite of Cnidnos, right, which is the one that was sort of pointing to her genitalia here, and looking at the influence, certainly over nearly a 200-year period between Aphrodite of Cnidnos to this Venus de Milo. She's no longer appears to be covering herself or ashamed, which is very interesting. But I'm going to, again, be quiet. All right. I'm going to try and just plow through this. A lot of the sculptural evidence we get from ancient Greeks come from temple contexts. I can't not talk about Greek sculpture and completely ignore the Parthenon. So I'm going to do it as quickly as humanly possible. Forgive me if you're interested, because I have to get through so much. But if just looking at this reconstruction of the Parthenon here, you can see that we have in the pediment, we have sculptures. We have sculptures all along here in the Doric frieze, but also inside you see there's this pathway here, but on the wall, on the inner wall, we have an Ionic frieze, which is a continuous frieze, right? So we have lots and lots of sculpture and imagery that is part of this structure. And I'm going to show you a few examples, and I'm going to race through this as quickly as possible. Here we go. So looking at the west pediment, the triangular area, we see this contest between Poseidon and Athena, and everything's just kind of exploding from the middle and sort of going in an outward way. The Doric frieze, right, which was the triglyph metope part, this, the little plaques in the front of the building, all show the scene of a conquest of the civilized over the barbaric. Originally, there was 92 different plaques. That's right. East, north, and west metopes were all seriously damaged. The east ones were gods and giants in combat. The west ones were along the theme of Greeks versus Amazons. The north ones were along the theme of Greeks versus Trojans. And the south metopes are the ones that are best produced, and the best preserved, and those are the ones I'm going to show you examples, a few quick examples of. And the theme here is from mythology, in an encounter between the Lapiths and the Centaurs. Here they are, ooh, yeah, Lapiths, Centaurs, not happy with each other. And so fighting each other, centaur, a manned horse, here's a lapith, and all very extraordinary in points of conflict and drama. Here's a naughty centaur taking away a woman to rape her because that's what centaurs do. So going forward, Parthenon also has relief sculpture on the Ionic frieze. That's that remember I showed you when we first started talking about the Parthenon, this sort of pathway here. And I said along this wall is a continuous frieze, an Ionic frieze. That frieze would have been 39 feet above the ground. So imagine you have to crane your neck up to be able to see it. The frieze itself is 3 feet high and 525 feet long. Lots to look at. Originally, all of this, as I showed you in the reconstruction, was all brightly painted in dark blues and reds and yellows. All kinds of details like horses' reins and bridles were actually added with metalwork and bronze, so they were really shiny. And the top of the frieze is carved slightly higher relief. That means the cuts are deeper than the lower part, and that was to help aid you to be able to see them from the ground. We think that perhaps the frieze represents the legend of Erechtheus and the sacrifice of his daughter to save the city, or some scholars argue that it may represent an ideal rendering of the procession for the yearly Panathenaic festival to celebrate Athena's birth. Not really sure. Here's a couple of examples. Again, it would have been continuous. 500 and some 25 feet, I think, of continuous iconography. But here's a few examples. Here's some of the examples that are on the south side here. This is one of the things that gives us an idea that it's a ritual setting. I could talk and I shouldn't talk. Anyway, bull is going to be sacrificed. All right. So here on the north side, again, another bull going to be sacrificed. Women carrying hydria, water, and then males on horseback. So much I could say. So west side, horseback, women in procession, relaxing, actually engaging in conversation with men, women carrying things. So again, it may represent the Panathenaic festival. That was quick. So, can't really talk about sculpture, especially if I'm doing sculpture through time and looking at temples without looking at Hellenistic sculpture. And probably one of the best examples of Hellenistic sculpture is to be found at the Great Altar at Pergamum. The west side has been reconstructed, and that frieze is over 7 feet high. Here we go. North wing of the west frieze, which is right here. Do you see? These are the figures that you would see, and here's the east frieze of the north wing. Lots and lots of drama, really, really high relief, i.e. super deep cuts, and the emotion and theatrical poses, and focus on the natural body, but yet also an exaggeration of it. Everything is high drama, and that is really super typical of Hellenistic art. Here we have a serpent. Yes, the whole thing is. Anyway, I'm going to go on and stop talking about that because there's more. Look at this. Oh my God. So north wing. Here's the east frieze. Oh goodness. There's the snake, and then oh my goodness, and goddesses and humans, and this is one of the sons of Laocoon, and oh my goodness, the drama and the pain. So big theater drama. There's Athena apparently not happy, and she's okay. Stopping talking now. Oh, wow. So that was the quickest Greek art lecture I've ever given in my whole life. Oh, actually, it was just sculpture, but still the quickest. Switching gears and talking about Phoenician and Punic, and because remember, there's a difference. The difference is in timing in part. Phoenician, we're talking about people in the second millennium and the early first millennium, but also continuing on, but only in the eastern part of the Mediterranean in the Levant. Certainly post 6th century BC and perhaps even earlier, because the founding of Carthage is in about 9th century or 10th century, probably 10th, I would say. There's some debate about that. Anyway, 10th century BC, the founding of Carthage, and especially once they start interacting with Romans, certainly by the 6th century, they're definitely called Punics, those people from Carthage, who seem by that point to be significantly different in many ways, certainly politically, from their ancestors in the Levant. So just leaving that short. So here we're going to talk about freestanding and relief sculpture as well, just like we did in the Greek world. Freestanding sculpture is going to include things made out of bronze and terracotta and faience, which is a glass-like substance. And relief sculpture is going to probably be found best on examples from sarcophagi. And materials are going to include relief on ivory and stone. Yes, so also in addition to sarcophagi, you also see it, especially the ivory reliefs are often things that were used as furniture, believe it or not. Okay, moving forward. Some examples. This is going to be a much shorter section than the Greek. Here's a few random examples of freestanding sculpture made of various materials from terracotta and stone and bronze. Here is a variety of Phoenician statuettes all made of bronze. And here is a collection of sculptures that date from the Punic period, the left two being freestanding sculptures and the right one obviously being relief at the top of a sarcophagus lid. And these are all made of terracotta. And then we have a relief sculpture that's much older than the previous slide, that definitively dates from the Phoenician period, and it's actually found in the area of ancient Byblos. It's our oldest evidence, in fact, for the Phoenician language thus far. To be perfectly honest, it dates from 13th to 12th century BC. Again, it's found in a funerary context, as this is a sarcophagus with various scenes and Phoenician words on it. Here's a detail on the right of this particular area of this narrative panel here. Okay, moving forward. Sculpture includes things done in ivory, and here are some lovely examples of Phoenician sculpture in ivory. Again, probably most of these would have been used as bits of furniture. Here are a few more pieces of Phoenician sculpture. The fine spot for these were actually much further east than Phoenicia. The Phoenicians were known for creating beautiful ivory sculpture, and the empires based in Mesopotamia would frequently commission Phoenician sculptors. And so these are all things found on the Mesopotamian side of Nimrud. And finally, I mean, you really have to kind of throw masks in the sculptural area, don't you? Because in many ways they are, I mean, it's not freestanding per se. It is in the round, sort of, kind of. And it's not really relief. So, yeah, but I think we have to throw them in here too. So here's various funerary masks, all dating from the Punic period. Okay, now we're going to turn and look at Etruscan sculpture. Again, I need to speak a lot faster. A freestanding sculpture would include things like acroteria, which are things that are going on top of roofs, architectural other architectural contexts, as well as in sarcophagi. Relief sculpture can be found in both architectural contexts as well as funerary contexts. This particular piece here is obviously something from a funerary context. It dates this sarcophagus of the married couple or of the spouses, depending. We often change these names over time because we realized, oh, that was really like not PC or whatever. How can we presume they were married or blah, blah, blah. No, anyway, so here they are. And comparing that one to something else, and also in the 6th century, which is found from a different site. The spouses are found at the site of Kyre, and then the funerary urn, which was used for a cremation as opposed to an inhumation, which the one on the left was, but dated in the same period and found at a different site, Cerveteri. But you can certainly see the relationship and how of the poses of these two individuals. Here's an example of some terracotta antefixes that were used on architecture. Again, like the Greek versions, they would have been in polychrome, and these would have been probably along the roof edges of temple or an opulent structure. Here's some more antefixes. Again, they would have gone in the same sort of place, and here's the great variety of some of those images. And here are a few examples of acroteria. These would have often been found on big statues on top of rooftops, especially along the apex of those roofs. So here's a few examples of those statues. And we also would have architecture, how big, sort of like villa, temples decorated with terracotta plaques, these revetments done in low relief. Here's a few random examples of low relief revetments. And here is an example of an entire tomb that was decorated in relief, the tomb of the reliefs. That's right. Yeah, it's not hard to remember, is it? So here, remember, we had the columns and all kinds of things that from everyday life use, all carved into the walls as if to create this home in perpetuum, with a bed back here and a pillow and the dog and blah, 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 everything that you'd ever want. Etruscans also made sculpture, freestanding sculpture in bronze, little small pieces and larger pieces, but lots of small pieces. Sometimes I have a hard time figuring out where to put these in our categories because sometimes we have these little figurines, these sculptures, and they're put on top of vessels. So do I put them, with vessels, or do I, stick them in sculpture? So here we are. Here's some of them. I could go. Yeah, I'm trying not to say too much. Very interesting, all really interesting. Here's some more bronze sculptures. Some more bronze sculptures. These are helmets, by the way. These are helmets and shields. So they're, this guy probably held a spear at some point. More sculptures. These date a little bit more to the 4th and 3rd century BC. Don't know why some of them are elongated and some are not. Here's some from Chiusi, wearing different kinds of helmets. Here are some examples of statuettes from the 3rd century. This one has got some Etruscan writing on it, so does this. This dove. Here are some funerary statuettes dating early in the 6th century. And here's another one from the 6th century, done in Nenfro, which is sort of stone. It's on a sea monster, by the way. This one also is in Nenfro from the 6th century. We have appears to be a centaur here. Remember, similar iconography used by the Greeks. And here are some, here again, see, this is a vessel, but yet, do I put this with the metalworking in general as like metal vessels, or do I talk about it with respect to statuary? So, here we go. We're doing some statuary here. So here's this scene with these three individuals that are actually placed on the top of this vessel, and the side of this vessel is heavily engraved, as you can see, with more narrative scenes in the States from 4th to 3rd century BC. Here's also another couple of statues that are on a top of a similar vessel. That kind of vessel is called a cista. We think it probably held trinkets and so forth. They think it's something that would have been owned, particularly perhaps something that might have been part of a marriage ceremony and owned by women. These are winged creatures, which is very interesting because a winged creature in Etruscan mythology are demons, and demons are not necessarily evil, but they're a sort of, in the realm of deities. Here's a couple, three different images or busts per se, done in stone, all of similar date in the 6th century, found in different places. Here's a couple of busts. Now we're talking the last three are from the 6th century. These are from the 4th and 3rd century. Clearly influenced, I would suggest, by what's going on in Greece. You can see a big difference in how they're depicting the human body. And even later yet, so we're going now 3rd to the 2nd century BC, and we get something much more veristic, real looking, like an individual. Not so much idealistic, but something that's attempting to get a sort of an honest, truthful image. Let's face it, nobody does a nose like this, trying to make it look perfect. It's interesting, this would have been an individual without question, right? Which is, again, remember something that we're leaning towards with respect to Hellenistic art at that period. An individual. Another place that we see imagery and sculptural-like imagery is in the realm of funerary containers, especially cinerary urns and that sort of thing. So just for the heck of it, I thought we'd start with this really early version dated in the 6th century BC, and we call it, the kind of vessel it is because it's in the shape of a person, right, with a head as a lid. So it's very actually kind of a similar thing going on at the same period of time in Egypt, and we call them canopic jars. Also in the 6th century, but later in the 4th century, following 6th century examples, and in the same sort of school as a canopic jar, rather than just the head being the lid, we have sort of the top half of a sitting individual. So the whole thing makes, in a way, a sculpture of a sitting individual, but it's an urn to hold the ashes. Other examples of cinerary urns that act as sculpture representing the deceased are here. And here we see this funerary urn of these two individuals, presumably spouses. Here's a close-up of one of the heads, so you can see the kind of detail that's provided in all the curls, and potentially an effort, perhaps, in creating a likeness of an individual. And over here is a 3rd century version, which is showing us some Hellenistic influences, certainly, when you look at the face and the lips, right? But yet you see some, this very Etruscan funerary garland, like we actually saw on the wall, frequently in the wall paintings as well. Here's some relief sculpture, also from funerary contexts. Sometimes we have them on sarcophagi, and sometimes they're just these sort of monuments that are set up in funerary contexts. It's interesting that on these monuments we often see similar activities that we see on wall paintings. Do you see with the dancing and the music and people of various ages and all engaging in these activities? Again, this sort of banqueting scene with the garlands, with a slave serving is going to be very comfortable in a wall painting as well. Images of horses as well, which we think may represent funerary games. More reliefs. Here's a close-up here to try and hopefully get a better view of the detail here. This particular individual is grabbing his sword, and he's going to assault this individual. So we have some kind of battle, perhaps, of giants, and we think of giants and Amazons. If you notice, some of them have penises and some of them don't. So clearly, they're the ones without penises are here, no penis, breasts, right? These are Amazons. So this is perhaps something from a Greek story, but over here we have on the sides these winged demons. So, as I've heard some people refer to them as death gods. I think that's probably an inaccurate identification, but they are these entities that lead the deceased often to what appears to be the other realm. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm going on about that. Here's one of those demons, and here's a couple of more funerary reliefs. The one on the right here is kind of interesting because it's an older one dating from the 7th to 6th century, and we see orientalizing motifs, especially with respect to this siren at the bottom, or this male figure at the top that's holding the two animals. It's a lot of art historians call it sort of this depiction a Gilgamesh depiction, or a master of the animals. And just a couple of more grave stele monuments from Etruscan context dating to the 5th century BC. Moving on to Roman sculpture, and I need to talk as fast as possible. Very little remains from the Republican period, but we get plenty of examples from the Imperial period. So I'm going to show you just a couple of Republican ones, and then we'll try. I have to pick and choose from the Imperial period, and it's really, really hard. So I'm going to just whiz through like lightning speed and just show you a couple of important pieces, and obviously not talk about them in any kind of detail that I might be able to. So ready, set, go. Republican, woo, yeah, this is a guy who's holding images of his forefathers, connecting himself as like amazing moral, pious individuals, revering the father, which is really important in Republican culture. And there's definitely a focus artistically in the actual likenesses, a verism, a truth telling of these individuals. A couple of more of Republican entities. Here's a male on the right, a female on the left. Most portraits we see are of older men, but occasionally we do see a female here, but they tend to be picked idealistically. When I say idealistically, I don't really mean so much as like perfect individuals of a human specimen. I mean more as, culturally idealistically, as moral and wise and upstanding and modest and things like that. Here is the only freestanding example I'm going to give you, which is a sculpture done in bronze from the 1st century BC, again showing an upstanding, moral, pious citizen. Then we get to the imperial age, beginning with the age of Augustus, and why not start off with a portrait of him? Yay, Augustus, there he is. Okay, gonna have to just keep going. One of the pieces from the Augustan period that I can't avoid is one of the Prima Porta Augustus. This is a freestanding sculpture that's probably found in the remains of the villa of Augustus's wife. Through this, we see the use of sculpture as propaganda. Sculpture will be used as propaganda continuously. He was a master, Augustus, an absolute master of using art as propaganda. But those that follow him will attempt to do it, but I don't think anyone ever does it as well as he does. A master manipulator. Anyway, so here he is as, idealized in youth, perpetually. And he's barefooted because barefoot means heroic. It also sometimes means no longer living. So at some point he's no longer living, so clearly it can mean that now. There's all kinds of iconography in here, which is making all sorts of suggestions that any viewer living at the contemporary viewer would have been able to read upon first glance. For example, our little Cupid down here below. This is to try and tell you that he is connected or related somehow to the gods. I could go on with a big story, but how do I do this quickly? So he and Julius Caesar, basically they claim that they are related to this character called Aeneas. Aeneas is the protagonist of the Roman story, the Aeneid, which is coincidentally written and was commissioned by Augustus, that told the story of a Trojan hero that escaped burning Troy and basically was the forefather of those that eventually founded the city of Rome. I'm making this a long story very short. And so they are suggesting that basically that they are related to the very founders of Rome itself and to great heroes from Homer's Iliad. And so Cupid here is riding a dolphin, which suggests the divine family, and the emperor is here claiming that he is directly related to divine grandparentage multiple generations before. And so here is what we think it might have looked like. Yes, it would have been in polychrome, just like the temples and just like all other marble statuary. It would have been colorful. We see fragments of paint on it to confirm a lot of the colors presented here. Here, I want to just show you that he's, we're definitely learning from classical examples in Greece, showing him next to the Dora Forest by Polyclides, right? This is when we get this development of the contrapposto pose, etc. You can definitely see the relationship between these two statues. I just want to tell you that I'm going to post this particular presentation. If you want to go back and look at these examples of material culture or statues or whatever closely and at your leisure, then passing over things that don't interest you, then it will be there for you. Just the slides for review I will post like the rest of them. Anyway, I don't have time to read all this, so just going forward, taking the quickest look at the breastplate here, just like the Cupid is meant to be read as that connection to the divine parentage. Um, all of these scenes would have been meaningful to the Roman viewer. They all have meaning. We see the scene is a Parthian giving back the standard. You know, his predecessor had, well, basically a Roman general had lost the standard, i.e., the thing you hold up when you're marching into battle that says, "I'm Roman, and this is what Romans we are." They lost it in a battle. And so the Romans were really ashamed. So Augustus is crediting himself for having gotten it back. And so he has restored, Roman pride. Uh, and the sky is being held up, signifying peace. And we have Mother Earth and a cornucopia, and all is wonderful and fantastic and amazing. And life is perfect and restored. And Augustus is bringing bounty, and Augustus is just bringing amazingness. So that's as quick as I can make that. I'm switching from the Augustus Prima Porta now to a little structure that is built by Augustus, so that I can take a quick look at Roman relief sculpture. We often see relief sculpture in architectural contexts, like altars and columns, arches, sculptural bases, funerary contexts, and materials are often marble and limestone. I'm going to show you the first piece I'm going to show you is called the Arapakis, but I also can't help but give you a super quick tour and show you a couple, like a column, and maybe an arch or two, real quick. So here we go. The Arapakis, yay! So Ara is altar. Pakis is of peace. It's the genitive for pax, peace. So the peace altar. This is something that's constructed by Augustus, our master of propaganda, if you recall. Would have been painted in polychrome, with various colors, right? Here is an example. This was a really cool thing, and they shined like colored lights onto the Arapakis to show how it would look in a painted version. It would have been just stunningly beautiful with respect to color. So it celebrates Augustus's triumphal return to Rome from Gaul, and all kinds of portraiture and allegory and religion and politics and references to public things and private things and messages throughout. Lots and lots of messages. We cannot look at all the panels, don't have the time here. Could probably spend a half an hour on this at least by itself, but I'm going to just whiz a few pictures back by you real quick here. One picture of an interior, ooh, really cool, made to look like outside with fence posts. Here we have images of bull skulls, which we saw from the Parthenon, if you recall, was suggesting sacrifice to the gods. Patera is a special, item used by Romans to sacrifice to the gods. And so lots of religious suggestions here, also references to bounty and that sort of thing. So piety and bounty. Lower panels all suggest, again, a bounty of everything is fertile and growing and nourished. These plants all represent that, as well as the empire itself is nourished and growing. Everything, these little animals in it, and everything is just dandy. Here we have a panel. We still debate who this is. Some people say this is sort of Mother Earth panel. Some people say it's Roma, or the goddess Roma, and she is nursing Romulus and Remus. Others suggest that just the twins signify just more fertility. flanked by air and water and peaceful animals, and everything's at peace, and everything is fertile, fertile, fertile. Here is a picture of one of the scenes on the exterior, when we, again, another ritual scene suggesting piety. It's interesting that we have this scene showing a sacrifice of a pig, but we also have in the background a little lararium, right? A little temple of the house gods, and we saw some of those at one point during the semester when we were looking at houses in Pompeii, if you recall. And we also have a senatorial procession. These are meant to be to look like they would have been identifiable as the actual senators. And we have an imperial procession, i.e., will be Augustus and all the members of the imperial household. They're all meant to be specifically recognized, not just the men, but the wives as well, and the children. He was big on family, Augustus. Here's an example of an arch. There are lots of arches. This is one of many arches all over the empire. They're in the east, they're in Africa, they're in France, they're everywhere. Arches, arches, arches. Lots of them in Italy. This particular one is the Arch of Titus. People would build these arches as a monument to their victory. And this is meant to celebrate the victory of the Jewish war. He was erected by his brother and successor, Domitian, and it's got engaged composite columns here. See these columns, how we only see sort of half of them. That means they're engaged. It's 50 feet high and originally had a bronze statue on the top with a 4-horse chariot and driver. You can see that here's the dedication, and I won't go into the reading of it. One of the many scenes, this is from inside of the arch here, is a scene of triumph. Here he is, Titus himself, and this is actually the personification of victory, the goddess victory. And here's Roma, and yay, anyone knows, you don't need words to say, Titus, victory for Rome. Another one of the detailed relief scenes inside shows the actual sacking of the great temple of Jerusalem. Here's the menorah, right? Taking away the spoils. There they go. It's really interesting because we see various, attempts at showing directional changes as they go, sort of go back into curving around here. Here's another example of a commemorative monument to commemorate the victory of an emperor. And in this case, it's not an arch, it's a column. And this is the column of Trajan. And it is one of many Roman victory columns as well. This is the only well-preserved piece, to be perfectly honest, of the whole forum of Trajan. And it records the campaigns and victories of Trajan over the Dacians. And I'll show you just a couple of scenes. And after his death, this bottom part becomes his tomb, which was really weird because people were not normally allowed to be buried within the walls of Rome. So a couple of friezes here. You can see it's this spiral continued frieze all the way up the column. There's a huge library built next to it, and you were meant to sort of look out the windows of the various floors of the library and be able to look at these columns. There's actually structures on both sides of it. Anyway, so the reliefs are carved on these hollow drums of marble in winding bands and includes 2,500 figures. Towards the top, the bands are about 4 foot tall each, and towards the bottom, they're 3 feet tall. A couple of close-ups here. Here at the bottom, this is supposed to represent Dacia, which we see here on the map here. So these are Germanic peoples in the east, so here we are, the Dacians, and this is the Danube River. So we're supposed to know that's the Danube. We're supposed to know this is where Dacians live because it doesn't look like where Romans live. It looks different. And here's the personified god of the river, Danube, right here. Here we see Roman soldiers who have created a pontoon bridge. Basically, they have lined up ships side by side so that they could basically walk across the river. So there they are. Here's this guy's carrying a standard. He's a standard bearer. And here's all the Romans carrying their mess kit. You see on their marching on their spears. And oh, here's that personification of the Danube here. And there's the Dacian town, and here are big giant Romans walking out of it. And you see there's the pontoon bridge again. Here they are, Romans attacking the Dacian fortress, doing their particular little tortoise shell maneuver here. So they're the Dacians, the hairy guys at the top here. Tell this is a Dacian. He's not wearing Roman soldier military costume. And so, and then here is something, the only reason I show you here, because virtually all these commemorative monuments had this particular scene. It's called an adlocutio. And the adlocutio is basically the scene in which the emperor himself addresses his troops. And so here he is. Here's Trajan right here saying, hey, you troop guys. And it's really interesting because they're trying to show a three-dimensional crowd, by seeing, you see all these different levels. The artist is trying to struggle with, well, how do I show that there was like tons of people there, right? I can't just show one line. So there's this attempt that we hadn't really seen in art before to sort of show this. So going through quickly. And then finally, this is a really interesting scene to me because it shows the death of Decabalus, which is the Dacian commander. So they've got him cornered here, right? So of course the Romans win, and that's why the whole thing is set up in the first place. So, but this is interesting because it's basically telling you that this guy was a formative commander and he was someone to be admired. Showing that your opponent was formidable makes you all the more formidable yourself for having actually beaten him. And this is, they're honoring, in a way, their commander by this scene because they're Roman, so they win, right? And they got him cornered. But what does this commander do? He chooses suicide over being captured, which is what the honorable commander would do in the eyes of a Roman. So looking some more now at some freestanding sculpture in the Flavian period, right? So here we have sculpture of a young woman made in about 90 of the common circa the year 90 in the Common Era. This is. I show you more from an art historical perspective, and that they're starting to use different techniques to show three-dimensionality and working to play with light and shadow of an individual. And they use a method called chiaroscuro, which is they sort of make these drill holes, right, in the hair and curls especially. And so this makes it look more realistic by, contrasting light and shade. There's an interest also in the Flavian period for a naturalistic, to the point, veristic, real, not just natural, but real, right? Very truthful impressions of individuals. Notice that she's got a similar hairstyle in the back as that woman did in the previous slide, see, with the long hair and sort of braids and done up here. They're also using chiaroscuro here to make these deep cuts and lines and working with the play of light and shade. Moving forward to towards the end of the second century of the Common Era, we have this freestanding bronze sculpture of Marcus Aurelius, in which he is sitting on his horse and looking ever so majestic and leader-like. And this, can I say ridiculous? Can I? Okay, I'm going to say it. Ridiculous example of the Emperor Commodus, in which he tries to depict himself as Herculean by he holds the various attributes of Hercules, this whole lion skin thing, and the club and the apples are all direct references to Hercules, and sort of presenting himself as a modern Hercules. And then by the time we get to the late Empire, all of a sudden things change. No longer are we so interested in verism, i.e. the truthful depiction of an individual, or even naturalism, really, to be perfectly honest. There's now the imperial agenda, and because the politics have changed, so have the art. The imperial agenda is trying to emit a sort of a sameness. So in the late Empire, we have an empire that's been broken down into two halves, basically. And we have the leadership of those two halves being each being a set of two consuls, sort of a senior and a junior consul. And so here we're trying to show the public this sort of camaraderie and unity and equality and sameness and stability, which is something the public really yearns for after, too much civil war. So individuality becomes obscured in abstractions, and the impression of power is more important than individual features. Official sculpture propagates the ideas of the tetrarchs, i.e. the four leaders there. Clarity, those ideas are clarity and uniformity and simplicity of organization, distance from the observer, and personality, which is subdued. And finally, the last Roman I plan to talk about is Constantine. Constantine has created, I think it's this particular statue was referenced in your readings last week, the colossal statue of Constantine. It's placed in a basilica. Formerly it was the Basilica of Maxentius, which is the son of Maxian, which is also basically, let us say, someone who has been vanquished by Constantine. The head itself is 8 feet 6 inches. The height of the whole statue would have been like 30 feet, and it's all made of Parian marble, i.e. marble that was imported from the Cycladic island of Paros. Looking at this reconstruction on the right, you can see that the only pieces we have left are a few fragments. We don't have the major part of the body. We have the head and a hand and a bicep and one breast and a knee and a shin and a couple of feet. And so here are those many of those pieces standing alone. It's interesting that when you look at the head itself, the eyes are looking up, and we see examples of the use of that deep drilling, perhaps because of the distance in which the observer had to see this, 30 feet in the air. So that the deep drilling helps to distinguish by using the light and shade. It's simplified. His hair is a simplification, sort of like a cap. But even though simplified, those eyes, they could be anyone's. We're not trying to go for something that looks like Constantine necessarily. But regardless of the simplification of all these different features, you see something that's, is powerful, nevertheless. That chin, right? That jawline, the nose. It's not it's not an idealistic nose. This is something that is somewhat expressive. So the strength, of this face is formidable and imposing. I think it's fun to show how large these things are by comparing them to other things. This hand next to this random woman who I don't know, and the toe with a kitten on it. Constantine also had all sorts of things constructed that were used for purposes of propaganda. And sometimes the layers of that propaganda are so deep that we don't always pick up on them right away. And I think one of the places that it's best to see, some of the layers of propaganda at play is the Arch of Constantine. This is erected in Rome, between the Palatine Hill and the Colosseum, and to the east of the Roman Forum. But, remember that Constantine is in Constantinople, and even though he's there, Rome is still, very much in the mind's eye of the Roman Empire, very much its center. This commemorates his victory over Maxentius, as if placing a giant statue in Maxentius's basilica wasn't enough. Anyway, so let's look at this and think of that arch of. I don't think I showed you the Arch of Septimius Severus. Sorry about that. I think I took that out, and yet I let that line in. So forgive me there. So anyway, let's look at this triumphal arch, though. Okay, so big arch. The one we did see, I showed you the arch was Trajan, wasn't it? We just had the one arch with Trajan, but one arch is not sufficient. Clearly, we need at least three when we're talking about Constantine, don't we? And you can imagine, so 3 arches also means a lot more room to make a lot more panels. We have apparently some freestanding sculpture at the top here, but look at all the relief panels here. Lots of words in the middle here. There's the dedicatory notice, but relief sculptures here, reliefs in these rondels, right? Reliefs in these all around the arches. So lots and lots of messages. Nothing is there randomly. Nothing is there without some kind of political message. In fact, the messages themselves are all important, but there's a message within the messages. What I mean is that I just think this shows a lot of audacity, that what Constantine did, not only did he arrange to have this huge, gigantic set of arches built that just says how powerful and amazing and he is, but he stole he stole a lot of these reliefs from monuments of great Roman emperors that went before him. And with that is another message. So it's like, not only am I me and I'm amazing me, but I am them and I am more than them and they are just a part of me. So people would have noticed this. It wasn't just like, oh God, I can't be bothered hiring somebody to make another bloody relief for me. Oh no. Wasn't about that. It's about sort of taking on. Now, and he picked very carefully which monuments and which emperors, right? He wanted to sort of usurp their identity under his own. So he chooses in particular some of the most popular emperors over time, Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius. And he chose reliefs from their particular commemorative structures and actually places them on his own, identifying himself with these people. It's more than identifying, incorporating them within him. So here is some the attic panels from a monument of Marcus Aurelius. So yes, he takes these from Greece. right? So there's some panels from, yeah. Um, and then here we have Dacian prisoners from a monument of Trajan, these freestanding sculptures at top. We already know about Trajan and his column, right? And about his victories in Dacia. So here are these Dacians, right? It's like, yeah, well, Constantine Seal's still saying, yeah, ye may have conquered them, but, we're kind of one and the same, and I still control it, and it's just a way of sort of, yeah, appropriating the fame of his predecessors. So here we are, victory, yay, very victory, and I control all these things. I am victorious. Here's some roundels, right? These roundels over the smaller arches, originally from a Hadrian monument. And they're meant to depict the virtues of Constantine. He's to imply a manly hunter and a pious man. Here we have a battle scene of Trajan and the Dacians, right? But somehow that's been incorporated by Constantine. And that is it for my sculpture. Oh my gosh, sorry it took so long. But I'm not going to pause long. If you want to pause me, feel free by all means to take a break, because I'm about to get into ceramics here. And a lot of the time I'm going to spend on ceramics are Greek, but I'll do a bit of Roman too. And we're not going to spend too much time on the other cultures that we have encountered this semester. Here we go. Minoans, you remember them? They had coarse wares and fine wares. These two terms are very common when you're dealing with ceramics in the ancient world. Coarse wares are simply that, those vessels that are made with pottery that's not very fine, got lots of big chunks in it. Pithos, or pithoi in the plural, pithoi here, are examples of coarse wares. Cookware tends to be coarse as well. Fine wares are the more delicate, special things that are often, decorated more and so forth. So Minoans, like all the other cultures that we're going to look at, had wares for everyday use and wares for more special use. Here's some of Minoan fine wares. If you recall, we had an emphasis on the natural world, a special emphasis on the sea. The Mycenaean ceramics differed. We didn't get that same emphasis on the sea and the natural world. We get something that tends to be more geometric, as is illustrated in the bottom here. And with their culture in general, showed a turn towards things more militaristic. On the left here are some plain wares, right, non-decorated vessels that would have been used for serving and drinking and so forth from the side of Pylos. Greek pottery. Now, I need to try and make this huge subject into something much, much smaller. So bear with me. I think I've done the impossible, and we shall see. Greek pottery. Greeks liked it decorated. So yes, occasionally we see plain wares as well, but we see lots and lots and lots of decorated wares with respect to Greeks. The Greek stuff. Styles are the indicators for age. So we have our stylistics is how we tell from what centuries at least or things were made. And we also look at fabrics. That also help us to see the origin of these various vessels. Each Greek state had its own distinctive stylistic signature. So they were each a little bit different, a little bit unique. Shapes express Greek drinking habits. We'll look at a variety of shapes in this presentation. And various vessels were often exchanged between states as a form of gift exchange. some were considered precious and some were considered far more utilitarian. I know, right? I purposely didn't put anything pretty on this page because I just want you to understand the difficulty of this subject. And that way you will appreciate when you see that I have tried to make it get very simple and and short compared to what I could do. These are the main stylistic periods of Greek pottery. Um, while I need to know this, you really don't. What you need to know, though, is that things changed through time. Sure, the stylistic approach to things changed, but also the epicenters of what was popular in the Greek world at large are traded far and wide. So stylistically, things change. They start out very geometric because you remember they're getting their predecessor are the Mycenaeans. So we go from geometric to something that starts to use more figures within that geometry, and we get two primary epicenters of pottery production, even though all the other states had a pottery production as well. But the two primary centers, when I say they're producing more, and they're also trading it, more of it, and trading it in further distances. And that's the pottery makers at Athens and the pottery makers at Corinth. Now, from there, Corinth will begin to take the lead, and they will be the key pottery production center in the Greek world for some time, let's say about 100 years. It's actually a bit more, to be perfectly honest, maybe 100, 150 years, let's say. So Corinth becomes the key pottery center, and we see we see Corinthian pottery everywhere. I mean, it's even coming into Athens. Corinthian pottery is all over the Mediterranean. And then things switch, and Attic takes the lead. And Athens takes the lead. Certainly by about 600 BC, Athens starts to produce what we call black figure pottery. It starts to spread throughout the Mediterranean. They produce it massively. The Etruscans love it. And then they switch off, but they remain the leaders of pottery production, and they switch off at about 525 and start doing something a little different, which we call red figure. In terms of stylistics. So I'm going to try and give you an overall visual impression of this without asking you to remember any of these dates, but I am going to refer to them. Okay, here we go. So remember I say we start out all sort of geometric like. So here's some examples, right? So we're coming from the Mycenaean era that's ending about the 12th century, right? And then we see the continuation of an interest in using geometry on pots. What we have from this particular period is almost exclusively coming from grave contexts. As we approach the 9th century and 8th century, we see that there's much more emphasis on using all the space of a vessel. Right, so look back here. Right, we used just bands of space. We weren't afraid of blank space, but here, whoa! I mean, God forbid there be anything blank. Right, so geometry becomes like something that has to envelop the entire vessel. So here's several examples of geometric pots, and here are some more. Right, every little part of these vessels is decorated with lots and lots of geometry, meander and triangles and straight lines. And yes, we get some figures. And here's an example up on top of these two individuals appear to be boxing or fighting. And then, of course, we have a couple of panels on this one on the left, at least 3 different panels where we see individuals. So we have a martial panel at the bottom where we have soldiers, and we have chariots in the middle, and a row of women at the top. It should be noted that a lot of these big pieces are also found in funerary contexts, and sometimes these scenes are reflective of funeral practices. This is a perfect example of one that's reflective of funerary practices. In the Greek geometric period, circa 9th to 8th century. This particular vessel is from the 8th century. And it is definitely a funerary vessel, because we see the deceased laying out in the bed here. This checkerboard pattern thing over the top we believe is the burial shroud. Below are some goats for some reason. We see all these individuals here, which are women. I know they are women because they're tearing out their hair. And that's what women do. When there's a funeral in the Greek world, they tear out their hair. So this individual is the deceased, and then this particular person is perhaps preparing the body, and so is this one for burial. The panel below is showing chariots and horses and shields, and perhaps this individual was somebody who died in a military situation. Perhaps he's a representative of funerary games. We're not really sure. That's all I can really say, because I have to keep going, don't I? So in the 8th, 7th century, we start to see a lot more emphasis on influence from the East. We see the clearly Greek peoples are looking out with an interest there. Potentially we have some craftsmen even emigrating from the East. Excuse me. We certainly have Greek settlements that are on the eastern, that are in the eastern Aegean, located in places like Almina here, which is in the mouth of the Orontes River. And a lot of the designs that we're seeing on pottery are also represented on bronzes and ivories that are they're being imported from Eastern contexts into Greece. Let's talk about some of these, but I think a perfect example is this vessel on the bottom of the page here. This is the ribolos, is the kind of vessel this is. And so we're no longer looking at things that are heavily geometric. We're starting to get away from those, and we're much more interested in animals, often animals that aren't real, things like griffins and sirens and that sort of thing. We see patterns like these rosettes, and we have things called palmettes that I'll show you too. They're all iconography that are coming from the East. Woo! So Orientalizing trends continue. That what I mean by trends that are taking up on images coming from the East. Certainly in the 7th century, we see a lot of this Eastern iconography, and it's expressed by far more diversity within paintings on Greek vessels. This particular vessel is expressive of this. You see this lion-type creature that has killed a deer-type creature. We see some of the geometry that remains here, but yet and the meander. But then we have it juxtaposed with things that are much more fluid. At this period of time, Corinth becomes the epicenter for the creation of pottery in Greece, and the kind of pottery that's more prolifically spread throughout the Mediterranean. This emphasis on animals, as you see here in virtually all these vessels, becomes predominant. Images like these sort of lotus blossoms at the bottom are also things coming from the Greek world. These sort of fantastic animals, these winged sphinx-like creatures, are coming from the East. Lion iconography is big in the East as well, so we see a lot of lions. Several of these have lions as well. More examples of this Corinthian pottery with the various processions of animals, some real, some fantastic. turning away from geometry, but yet still a need to fill the spaces, right? So this time, though, rather than filling the spaces with geometry, a lot of time they're starting to fill them with florals, these palmettes. You see, this is a different version of these floral, and here's another version of the floral, and here's another version. First half of the 6th century BC. This is towards the end of, let us say, Corinth's range over, ceramic popularity. We get this really cool example, which we call the Chigi vase. It's a Proto-Corinthian form, but it's found in an Etruscan context. In fact, probably most of the truly amazing vases that we have found through archaeology have been found in Etruscan contexts, predominantly in tomb contexts. The Etruscans clearly appreciated Greek pottery. So here, one of the reasons that this vase is particularly interesting to us, because this is our first example of a particular military formation called hoplite military formation that we hear about from literary evidence. So this is interesting. We have this flute player and our Greek troops with their shields in their hoplite formation. Proto-Attic. Sorry. At the same time that the Corinthians are doing what they do, we see that the people in Athens are doing their own thing still, and yes, they are too adopting things from the East, and they are adopting some things from Corinth. Their stuff is just not going far and wide, though. It's kind of interesting that what we do see in Athens at that time are really big vessels, and big vessels that tend to be used as funerary markers. These are some interesting examples here on this page. All of them for funerary markers. Sometimes we see scenes of, death scenes or preparing the body for a funeral. Sometimes we see fantastical images. Again, look at these sort of creatures here. And some more of these fantastical creatures at the top here. And here we have a illustration of a Homeric story. This is the story of Odysseus and the Cyclops. So here's Odysseus, our guy in white, wearing white here. These are his crew members behind him, and here he is stabbing the Cyclops in the eye. As pottery production and popularity of Corinthian pottery production declines, it is replaced by an interest in what's going on in Athens in the 6th century, which is black figure pottery. Here is probably this archetypical example of black figure pottery. It's pretty easy to spot because the figures are black. That's right, they're black. Black figure. So it's interesting, but what's happening more here, more than just changing the technique of pottery, creating a lot of the vessel in black, creating the background for our scene, often narrative. And this would have been in the vessel color, this sort of red background. But also have artists using techniques that they never did before. This is a great example. This is a famous pot by the potter Ezekias. And the scene is showing here Ajax and Achilles, which are two Homeric characters playing a game. This is honestly, I've got to be truthful, one of my favorite pots. Partly because I really like the approach of this particular potter. I probably shouldn't have showed you this first because it's not typical. But what this potter does is he tends to sort of capture moments in time, and not necessarily the moments that you would predict, i.e. maybe like Achilles vanquishing Hector or something like that, which would have been an expected theme. But a theme you wouldn't expect, something that happens right before something else might happen, an generally unimportant moment. Here we have Achilles and Ajax. perhaps just resting. They're not in battle. You can see that their equipment, right, their shields and their helmets are put to the side. They're not wearing them right now. They're on perhaps taking a break from guard duty, right? Although they're holding their spears, so perhaps they're on duty. Perhaps they're back at the camp, but they're bored, right? And so while they're waiting for some other moment to happen, some important moment in legendary time, right? They're playing a game. So it's the humanity. It's the moment before the moment. Anyway, so I don't know. So that's what I like about Ezekias. And here we also see some artistic devices like these crisscrossing diagonals. You can virtually make X's, and the overlapping of the spears you see at the bottom, and then the bodies, right? If you continue the line here, right? So what's also cool is you have this alternation between unarticulated surfaces and dense patterns, especially looking at their cloak, right, and hair. And arrangement coordinates with the vessel shape too, right? So the painter has no illusion that he's painting on some flat canvas someplace. The painter is very aware of the shape of the thing he's painting on, right? And so he goes with that shape. If you look at the shape of this vessel and then the shape of the backs, right? So anyway, so yeah, I mean, look at the handles here and how they seem to sort of continue with the shields, right? Anyway, super cool. I gotta go through this fast, so I'm just gonna throw out, give you some more examples of black figure technique. This is actually a Corinthian crater using that Attic black figure technique. I know that's black figure because, of course, the figures are black. This is kind of unique and interesting. You don't often see this frontal facing sort of image, but even though it's frontal facing, the actual heads themselves are not front facing, if you notice. The charioteer looks to one direction and the horses, none of them are looking forward. That's often the case. You don't see, when you see an individual looking forward, it's unnerving and it's purposeful. Again, see, nobody looks forward. Nobody looks forward. Sometimes deities will look forward, or it's a scary thing for someone to look forward at you. So here's a couple more black figure examples. This one's kind of interesting because we actually have somebody painted white here. This is meant to be a female, right? She's a female flute player. But everyone else here is black figured. Here we have Theseus, is another mythological tale. Theseus killing the Minotaur here. A couple more black figures. Here's a black figure vessel of some satyrs. They're these sort of woodland creatures, these people that are in wild places like forests, where they run around with erect penises all the time. They like to drink wine. They're associated with Dionysus and wine and partying and fun. They often like to find these sort of wild women that are running around in nature too and not controlled and obviously locked up in the house where they should be, because that's definitely where Greeks thought they should be. So these wild women, maenads, they often like to rape maenads. So there they are. And on the right here, is actually, okay, it's another one of my favorite things. This is also, I believe, a pot by Ezekias. Again, another one of those moments, those not the moment when the action is happening, but the moment right before. And here we see Ajax, right? One of the characters we saw in that first vase. He was playing in a game with Achilles, wasn't he? But here, Ajax is upset. He's feeling slighted. That he didn't get to win this armor. Anyway, he's really upset. And so his pride has been injured to such an extent that he sees that the only way out is to kill himself. And so there he is, preparing for his suicide, placing the sword in the ground so it stands up so that he can fall on it and murder himself. And boy, I have never shown that few black figure vessels in my life because they are so fun. Turning to red figure pottery. Here we are. See? Now why is it called red figure? Because the figures are red. Yay. And so here they switched it out, right? So the background isn't red, the background is black. But the figures are red. And this is going to be the trend for, a couple of centuries now. This particular pot is a super interesting, famous pot. We know who the painter is. It's Euphronius. And the potter is Euxithios. And the title of this piece is the Death of Sarpedon. This also is another reference to the war between Greece and Troy that we read about in Homer's works, the Iliad. And so here we have a Trojan that is killed by Patroclus, or I've written here Patroclus, the Latin looking version of it. So this Trojan's been killed by Patroclus, who is the cousin of Achilles. And it's a fascinating piece for many reasons. A lot of it for artistic devices use. Balance and counterbalance, right? Verticals and horizontals, right? Look at the balance here of these horizontals and the lance bearers, like I said, on each side. And here's Hermes in the center. Hermes is often depicted as somebody who guides people into the next life. He's not just the messenger, but he actually is a guide to the nether world. So the arrangement also coordinates with the vessel shapes, right? The backs of individuals are along the same curvature as the handles, etc. So again, we have an artist who is aware of where he or she is painting. Here's a close-up, another way to see some of the cool detail included in this particular narrative. So we can see the blood gushing out of Sarpedon's body here. We also know it's Sarpedon, not just because of the way the scene is, but in this particular example, we see that the artist has given us the names, right? You see, I've written here Sarpedon, but the artist has written Sarpedon, right? This guy's name is Thanatos. This guy's name is Hypnos. And here is Hermes. They're all taking him away to the afterlife. Here's a couple more red figure examples. Here's red figure amphora from the 6th century. Shows 3 symposias. Again, symposium is some place that was meant for men only, except for unless you were a courtesan or a flute girl, of course, if you're there for entertainment. Other than that, you were not invited. So these guys are having a good time, woohoo, dancing, enjoying the symposium with your guy friends. And on the right here, we have a Hydria from Apulia, which is actually in Italy, right? So a lot of this stuff is getting imported into Italy. This is an interesting scene because we don't often see women on vases, and we don't often see women doing normal women things. So here we have women doing normal women things, which would be spinning and winding wool. A few more red figure vases. The one on the left is also very interesting with respect to its scene. again, we often get mythological scenes or we get scenes from a symposium. We don't so often get scenes from everyday life. And this is really cool. This shows men at work in a potter's workshop, actually, on a pot, showing how pots are made, which is really super cool. In the middle is a scene showing Apollo and Artemis. And on the right, a scene shows Pandora rising from the ground before love-stricken Epimetheus. So, look at him, yes. So again, one of those mythological scenes. Who is the guy with the wings on his hat and boots? You know who he is. Wings on hat and boots means Hermes, right? Here we are with a kylix. This is a drinking vessel, the kind of vessel you would use to drink wine during a symposium. And it's super interesting because we see musicians at play here. And like scenes that show musicians, I think are interesting. And on the right is a hydria, which is a vessel that's used for water holding vessel. 6th century vessel, again showing more musicians. This is my musician-y page here. Stamnos, which is probably something else that would it's used probably for drinking as well. This particular piece is again coming from an Etruscan context, but it would have been imported into Etruria. This is also an interesting scene because what we're seeing here is a warrior that's leaving home to go to battle. This is our warrior going off, and he's going to be making a dedication to the gods, and this is presumably his mother, who is very sad to see him go. Another one, red figure vessel from Volci in the 6th century, shows Athena here. We know it's her because of her helmet and all, certainly, and Heracles. On the left here is a kylix, red figure kylix from an Etruscan context, Volci, showing horse training. The Etruscans really liked horsey ones. They liked vessels with horses. Horses seemed to be a much more important part of Etruscan culture. On the right here is another one from Volci, also a kylix. Again, this type of vessel form would have been used in symposium for wine drinking. But this is interesting too. This is somebody making a dedication at an altar. And whew, that was it for Greece. It may have seemed to you like it took a long time, but believe me, it was short. So, getting through this, Phoenician ceramics, I have very few slides here because I don't have a lot of example of Phoenician ceramics for all the reasons that I don't have a lot of anything Phoenician. Partly, as I've said in the past, not enough work has been done on Phoenician contexts. Number two, actual Phoenician centers in the Near East are all still have thriving giant cities over the top of them. And so also we don't have, one of the reasons we have so many Greek vessels, as I've said before, is they found in it's because we had the good fortune of them being buried in tomb contexts. So if a volcano hasn't come over something, or if they haven't been put away in these tombs full of treasures, right, we don't get as much of it. So here we are. Here's some few examples of Phoenician ceramics. Yes, sometimes we see some geometric stuff, right? But often they're just red. They're very red looking. Here's a few examples of Phoenician ceramics that I found at Monte Polizzo, just so we can look at the kind of things we find. Really minimal. On the bottom here is a Carthaginian lamp, so this would be Punic, right? Not Phoenician. On the top right is a Phoenician jug. To be perfectly honest, we're probably talking Punic for the jug and the plate here as well. Here's a couple of ceramics from other places in the Western Mediterranean. The bottom left one is from Sicily, from the Phoenician site of Motia, and the right one is from a necropolis at a Phoenician settlement in Spain. And here's an example of transport amphorae, the containers used to transport various fluids, oil, wine, etc., in the Mediterranean. And these four types are all from Carthage and date from the 4th to the 3rd century BC. Switching cultures again. We're going to go to Etruscan ceramics now. I've got a few more examples of this than I did Phoenician, but not as much as I did Greek, so don't worry. Early Etruscan ceramics were made of impasto, and so here we are, which is a very coarse clay. During the Villanovan period, they were not made by a wheel; they were made by hand, so which is why they're not perfectly symmetrical. During the Villanovan period, Etruscans also made vessels for the deceased ashes in the shape of huts. And so here's a few examples of hut urns. We learned about all this stuff when we talked about Etruscans in week 6, and these are also made of impasto. They made all kinds of other things out of pottery as well. Here's a few examples of sort of candelabra made in the 8th century BC. They were used for both domestic and funerary use. Here's an example of an incendiary urn made of terracotta from 7th century BC. Like I've said before, even when we saw things made out of bronze, sometimes the Etruscans created vessels, but also then created sculptures that went on top of those vessels. Here is a vessel called an ascos, dated from the 7th century, with a sculpture of a warrior on a horse placed on top. And here is a sort of pitcher made of impasto, dating from the 7th century, a type of pitcher called a oinakoe. A couple more impasto vessels dating from the 7th century. You can see a wide array of different shapes. And from the 8th century onwards, we start to see that vessels coming in from Greece are having an influence on the way things are made in Etruria. And vessels made by the Etruscans begin to take on, some of them at least, take on some of the same artistic motifs as we see in Greece. Not all of them, because believe me, the Etruscans still very much continue to develop on their own trajectory, but some things start to, explore these influences coming from the Greeks. And so here's a perfect example here of an Etruscan pot made by an Etruscan found in Etruria that seems to be influenced by the way things are created in Greece, especially when it respect to this geometry and the triangles that we also see on the people depicted on Greek works. Here's a few more examples of what we call Etrusco-Corinthian pottery. So it's pottery made very much in the Corinthian style, but made in Etruria. Presumably, it may well, some of them may well have been made by Greek artists that had immigrated to Etruria, but they're using Etruscan clay and Etruscan materials to create pots sometimes that look very similar to pots that are being created in Corinth as well in the 7th century. Remember, they're really popular in the 7th century, the Corinthian pottery at that time. And they're being spread far and wide. At the same time, however, like I said, they continue to develop their own pottery styles. And quite honestly, one of the most quintessentially Etruscan pottery is a type of pottery that we call bucaro. Bucaro pottery is really unique in a lot of ways. In part, it's unique because of the process that they use, which we're not really able to replicate, to be very honest. The process they use to create this super black pot. And it's not just black on the outside. You'll see from this example I have from Montepulciano that even if you break open the piece, it is dark black through and through. So it's very special. And it's made of a very fine clay, and it's just at a smooth surface that they burnish to the point that it shines with a sheen. These two examples to the right are examples of bucaro pottery. We think that one of the things that they were trying to do was potentially attain this sort of shiny semblance of metal, perhaps to have it be a cheaper version, and yet have the same shiny effect. This particular vessel at the bottom and the one at the top, for that matter, are both shapes that they would have also created in bronze. So it may be the case that the goal of bucaro was to mimic metal vessels. We're not really sure. Here's some more examples of this bucaro. It's a bucaro sottile is to be technical, is the finer version. They made another type of bucaro that was not so fine and shiny and beautiful and perfect and smooth like this. So here's one with some incisions. Again, Etruscans like their horses. Moving on to Roman pottery, our last group of pottery, and then we'll just have a very small section at the end. And it looks like I'm going to get this under 3 hours, which is pretty exciting. So Roman pottery, gosh, again, I'm going to try and make a really big topic really, really small. The good news is the Romans were not all that big on the whole decorating of pottery, so that helps make it a little bit easier. So when we're talking about Roman pottery, we're talking about pottery which was made and used within Italy and the Roman provinces, and it dates from about 100 BC to the Common Era, 600, so about 7 centuries worth of pottery. If we're going to divvy it up, we're going to divvy it up into 3 different types over 3 different periods. The oldest part being this sort of black glossware that happens from about 200 to the year 50 BC. I know I'm going a little earlier than I just said I would. And then to the terra sigillata, which is a type of pottery that we see. It's really important because terra sigillata is associated with the expansion of the Romans during the imperial period, and especially well, not really so much. Sorry, I'm confusing you. The expansions of the Romans, let us just say, when the Romans first start to reach out long distance, when they first start to connect with places, and early imperialism, let us say, right? The expansion of Roman lands into the east and into Greece and into places like Britain. Even though we're technically not imperial yet. So let us say signs of Roman expansion. And then from about the 1st century of the Common Era to 700, one of the marks of Romanness is going to be the presence of this particular type of pottery called African red slipware. Anyway, my favorite of the 3, I'm not sure if I made that clear. Not that you really care, but I'm telling you, terra sigillata, Samian ware. So it's really interesting, it's really distinctive, and really marks this connection of Romans with the outside world. Telltale signs of a Roman pot. If it looks like a pot and it doesn't look like that interesting, there's a couple of signs that you can that tell you it's Roman. One of those signs is this ribbing, right? All these lines on the outside of this pot tells me, wow, it's probably a Roman pot. And this is something that we're going to see on coursewares, like cooking vessels, storage vessels. Other telltale signs of a Roman pot are pots with indented bases. Do you see here? Like this little indentation, a little button at the center. It also have these what they called sliced handles. So basically they made these handles and they kind of cut off the sides here and made them really flat. Romans did that. The Greeks didn't do that. Other people didn't do that. When it comes to transport amphorae, there's a couple of telltale signs. Sure, the fabric is definitely distinctive, but also there's these stamps, right? Transport amphorae, remember, are commercial containers. We saw just a few minutes ago some examples of Phoenician ones. And I said they often carried wine and oil and other stuff. Well, the Roman ones do too. And so here's some examples of various shapes of Roman transport amphorae and where they're coming from within the Roman world and then the period of time they're coming from. Transport amphorae, a lot of scholars have spent a lot of time trying to organize and understand where they're coming from because they often can be used to date a site, especially when based on stamps. Do you see? The stamps are specific to often the contents, right? So, and in shipwreck context, speaking of context, we often get stoppers on them as well, like corks. All right, so those three distinctive Roman groups of pottery, remember the black gloss wares or the terra sigillata or the African red slip wares. The earliest of them looks a lot like this. So they called them black gloss wares, but if you look, you'll see that the pot itself is not black. So this is a slip. So you have a pot, the pot has been created, right? And it's probably kind of an orangey color here, or yellowy orangey color. And then it is dipped into a thin, watered down slip, thin watered down clay to give it the black color. Terra sigillata, aka Samian ware. This is the one that was my fave, remember, because it marked the expansion of the Romans. And here are some examples of it. It also is slipped with a darker slip on the outside, and the inside is a lighter clay. These are often made in a mold, and here's some examples on the right here of some of the molds used to create this. So they weren't, they would just smush the clay into the mold, and the design would be there, so that you could manufacture an unlimited quantity of a bowl that looked exactly like this, because you could reuse the mold over and over and over again. It was a quick way to make what appeared to be a fancy pot. Lots of regional centers of production and consumption when it came to terra sigillata. And those centers often change through time. So here are examples of different parts of the Roman world that were centers of creating this particular type of pottery and the times that they created them. And I'll leave that to you to read if you choose to later. Some common shapes. Footed plates, bowls. Sometimes they made matching sets. Remember I said in the molds you could make an unlimited number of bowls with the exact same pattern on them. So they would make whole sort of sets. African red slipware. This is this is the ware that is found in sites that tend to date from about the beginning of the Common Era to about 600. And here's a few examples. Pretty red, slipped, aren't they? Three main types, however, because it depends on, in part, where they were made and when they were made. People have spent huge amounts of time studying them, trying to delineate between one red slipped pot and another red slipped pot. And they've come up with these criteria that there are three main types, A, C, and D. One presumes there was a B at one point and it was then amalgamated into one of the others. So A, they each have a different kind, a slightly different texture of clay and a different way of doing things. For example, like D, you'd see the slip, it's only applied on the interior and the rim. But in C, the clay is smooth. So if you're a Roman pottery expert, these are all things that you need to look for. Some common shapes. Well, earlier periods show small dishes and bowls with a low foot. Right, you see this is a foot. Later versions are larger. We see broader vessels with flat bottoms. The later ones aren't polished anymore, and they're less decorated. Earlier, decorated. Thin-walled wares is another type of pottery that I didn't mention as my three main ones, but I'm just showing you that there's still variety in the Roman world beyond those three primary types. These are things that are used more for every day, like drinking vessels, or drinking bowls, beakers, everyday sort of things. Roman coursewares, of course, they, like any other culture, had coursewares. Here's the ribbed pot that I showed you in the first slide. And here's a couple other examples of coarse vessels. Again, everyday sort of use stuff. Buffware is one of these types of coursewares, and you can see because they're buff colored, right, or cream or buff colored. Jugs, flagons, serving vessels, everyday stuff, right? These don't have a slip on them at all. This is just the raw clay. Cookware. Again, lots of ribbing in the cookware. No slips on these. Excuse me. Things that need to be exposed to heat, things that are rather coarse. And finally, mortaria. Mortaria is like a mortar, right? You would take a pestle and you would grind stuff up in it. They kind of made mortaria all the same. Mortaria were buff cream colored, just like this. They're pretty distinctive in the archaeological record. They're very, very coarse, lots of chunky bits inside the pottery. They're always this color, and it's like, yay, mortaria. Sometimes they have maker stamps on them even. Okay, we're almost done now, guys. Wake up, everybody. So, a few more things I just want to throw at you before we end this. Just more eye candy, other stuff made from other materials. Minoans like to make lots of cool things out of stone. Little things like these, little stones that made like seals and vessels and so forth. The Romans also made things out of stone. This particular example here is called the Gemma Augustea. And it's a gemstone carved in low relief with blue onyx, right? So this outside dark bit is blue, but the onyx itself, the stone, had this white vein. And so the artist sort of carved into, did relief sculpture and exposed that white vein within the onyx stone to create this amazing, beautiful thing. It's the subject is the apotheosis of Augustus, i.e., the the going up to the gods, the Augustus going up and becoming a god after death. That's what's going on here. We see lots of idealized heroic figures here. It's all very dramatic. Yay. Phoenicians were especially noted for working with glass. They made some pretty amazing, cool objects in glass. So here are some examples. And here are a few more examples of Phoenician glass. Sometimes we see these really cool holders, these little glass containers with these little beautiful gold holders. Romans also made things out of lead and alkaline glazed wares, which are a little bit, different than the things they made from pottery, with, they were colorful and they had sort of relief on them. And that is it. I thank you so much for your patience and for joining me for this presentation, our last one. And I look forward to meeting you all again sometime. And I will be sending out some written instructions for your final exam. Again, thank you for joining me this semester, and take care.